to just talk about how at Africa you learned about the communication dynamics as well as the cultural protocols of different communities while you're interacting with different villages. So what exactly did you learn about these different villages and different communities that you got to interact with?
I learned a lot, especially that my mind was inquisitive and I was open-minded, but also in secondary school, I was at Roma Girls and we had Sister Kiran. She was really, really strict with us. And she always would tell us, a small thing is a small thing, but it's a great thing to be faithful to a small thing. So that has been in the back of my mind all these years. And she would always say, something worth doing is worth doing right. If it's not worth doing, don't do it. So I think that was what was in my subconscious in whatever little job I was doing, with whatever little new thing I was embarking on. So entering Africare, there were lots of departments. So I was started off at the reception, obviously because of the public relations I had learned from Shogun. So I was taught how to answer the phone. You don't pick up the phone and say hello. You say, good morning, how can I help you? You're through to Africare and blah, blah, blah. Then the people would feel a part of Africare and would state what they want, and then you would assist them or redirect them and always say, thank you very much for calling Africare, have a nice day. And you put down the phone. So that in itself was what I learned to carry into you need to observe how they live, how they receive you, how they are dressed, how they are looking. So I learned when going off into the field to always carry a wrapper and a headgear, because at times your outward appearance in jeans, the old women would just judge you and say, what are these people coming to do here? They're invaders, they're town people, what, all these questions come up. When you show up in a wrapper, a chitenge, and a headdress, they would look at you as being respectful and as being courteous. They would offer you a chair, but you should opt to sit where the women are sitting, on the mat. Then they feel that you are part of them. Then they'll open up better. And you don't speak to them in English and expect them to answer. Whether or not they know English, they can speak English. Try to speak to them in a local language. So I knew Bemba, I knew Tonga, I knew Nyanja. So I would speak in Nyanja for areas like Chivombo and Chongwe. For areas like Petauke, I would also speak Nyanja. For other areas, I would speak whatever language they are generally speaking. So when we sit with the women, the men, of course, would sit on the chairs, as women would decline the chairs and sit on the mat. That's called enculturation. I didn't know that then. I just behaved that way because I was told to behave that way. And the responsibility is where you already observe the community that you are going into and already start to fit in. If it means you sit on the bare floor where there's no mat, they'll respect you more and offer you a mat or a lower stool to sit on. So communication starts with the word go. When you come out of the vehicle or off the motorbike, how do you greet? We learned that in certain areas, you don't look at the men in their eyes. You look away, because the culture there is that if a woman looks into the eyes of a man, they're being challenged, especially in the presence of headmen and chiefs. You look away as a woman. Not that you disrespect them. You will be disrespecting them if you look at them straight in the eyes. But if you avert and clap your hands, you don't offer a handshake as a woman, because then it's not part of the local culture. So communication-wise, I found that the women have a lot of information. They are the barriers of indigenous knowledge. They are the torch bearers. Women are in charge in the village. I know I'll be challenged on that aspect. But then a perfect example is when there's a funeral. The men are outside under the tent on the chairs and they're outside. but they always send an emissary into the house to consult the matriarch. The matriarch is the oldest woman at that given time. They take on situational leadership. They consult with them. When can we bury? When can we do this? When she says we won't bury until so and so also arrives, the funeral will take longer than expected. But the mouthpiece are the men. They'll stand up and make the announcement, and we all think the men have decided that the funeral would take longer. In the village, when selecting the site for a well or a hand pump or a school or a clinic, the women are the decision makers. The men are the mouthpiece, because the women have been taught to submit, not to be the ones talking and being seen to be the leaders, but they make the decisions. The men are the mouthpieces. Sometimes would go there and the meeting has a deadlock. You can't continue with the meeting. The men will stand up and say, we need to sleep over this decision because we need to discuss as men. At night, they talk to their wives, they talk to the matriarch. When you go back again tomorrow, the decision is made and the mouthpiece is the man. So that little piece of information can either make your project or your visit to a village setting successful, or it can break down all communication and the project and objective of your visit will not be achieved at all. So I learned all that at that early age. Hello?
I can get you.
Yeah. So from Africa, all those cultural dynamics, the community dynamics, how you communicate to elders, how you communicate to the male folk, including the boys. In some areas, the boys have more authority over the older women simply because they are male. That's their culture, and we respect that. It's been there for aeons. So you, as the outsider or as the development worker or the development agent, would have to appreciate that for you to succeed in why you were there.
Interesting. I think I'm sure even like I've observed that there are some church meetings as well where if you meet at someone's house, even the women usually sit on the floor and then the men sit on the seats. So I guess some of those practices are still even in the urban areas as well. But I guess it's also really interesting to know that you got to experience these things firsthand from the people who practice these things more closely and the like. So I think it's a really brilliant experience if you ask me. And now moving forward to the aspect of how there's a point now you came to now have to decide what exactly you were going to study after you had completed grade 12. So you had the option of pursuing a bachelor's degree at UNZA in economics and also a forestry diploma at Mwekera in Kitwe. So now I'm imagining that this particular choice may not have been the easiest of to make. So what made you come to that decision, and how did you overcome the barriers of your family not being for the idea of you pursuing forestry? And I think there's so many people who just hearing a bachelor's degree in economics at UNZA, they would jump for it or they would run towards it. So how did you come to that decision of pursuing forestry?
Okay, that was one of the most difficult times of my life because both my parents are graduates. A lot of my extended family are graduates from UNZA and from international universities of the day. It was difficult for me to make a decision because my mom was registrar at UNZA then. And she wanted me to go there because I had the qualifications. My dad thought I had the interest, but then I wasn't interested in economics because it wasn't going to do for me what my passions wanted. With economics, At that time, we didn't have environmental economics. We just had the mainstream economics. So against my parents' and family's wishes, I opted to go for what I wanted to do. I followed my passion. And when I finally convinced my mother and father that forestry is what I wanted to do, they said, but what good comes out of being Kapenda Mabula? What that means is it's kind of a derogatory term that was used back in the day to say that all that people who work in the forest do is count leaves and that's all. But then for me, it wasn't about counting leaves. It was about being in nature. I had never been to Mwekera before, but the stories I was told by the late Lyson Piri, who was my supervisor at Africa, was that it was a beautiful place and that the courses were really practical, that you would spend a lot of time in the bush, walking around and identifying tree species, going to the lake and identifying why certain plants only grow near the water and they don't grow in the plateau areas, why certain insects are only found in certain areas, that they're actually termites that are miners of the soil. There were so many beautiful things that he described, and most of all, he described the fact that whatever course you were interested in within the forestry program would lead you into self-employment. Foresters are not supposed to be poor because even from the soil and seeds from a mango or a guava or a lemon fruit, you can create a nursery and sell the trees for money. You can be engaged in consultancy work, you can be engaged in survey work, in landscaping, in permaculture, in civiculture. All these big names are referring to the simple acts of ensuring that nature is regenerating itself within its own cycles. So when I explained to my dad to say, look, we went on game drives and I asked you about the animals and I asked you why some are big, others are small, why some are man-eaters and meat-eaters and others are big, like elephants, but all they eat is vegetables and fruits. That's what I want answers to. And he said, but that won't get you a job. You won't make money from being a forester. I said, but the money will come when it comes. I don't want to sit in an office and not do what I want to do. Then that will be a job. But let my talent and my passion create me a job. Then I'll be making money with a smile on my face, as opposed to being in a job that I really have no interest in, unless you want me to do the economics for you, and then later on I do forestry for me. But we can switch. I do the forestry for me, then later on I'll do economics for you. He tried to explain, but then I was like, okay, I'll do it anyway. And he knew I used to be stubborn. Maybe I'm still stubborn now, but that's what my passion was, and that's what I wanted to do. Ironically now, I'm the consultant of the family. Anybody who's buying land will pick up the phone and say, hey, come see the plot I want to buy. How is the soil? How is the vegetation? How is this? How is that? Does it have water? What do the trees do? Can we have bees on this land? And I'm like, but you're the same people who said I'm a Kapenda Mabula. So you're going to pay for the service I'm going to give you. And they're like, fine, how much? I just want to know if this piece of land is able to give me the yield in the crops and the whatever. Some of them are now in avocado farming and they have bees on the side. So the bees are pollinating the avocado trees, ensuring that there's a higher yield of avocados. They're making money, I'm making money, we're all happy.
Oh wow. I like this. I really like this part of your story because I guess for me it really brings out that you knew what you wanted and you're not going to let anyone else deter you from that path, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Um, and I think it's also a lesson to all of us about how exactly we should go about really pursuing what we want, so that we get the life and the career that we want, so that we're not just doing something so that we can make money, but at least we're making money with a smile on our face, as you put it. Thank you so much for that response. Just a reminder to everyone who's present that if you have any question, contribution, comment, and the like, feel free to put it in the chat and we will address it as the webinar goes on. I'd also like to ask, after you joined, you had the opportunity, or rather you joined the WWF, which is the Worldwide Fund, and your worldview happened to change right after you were nominated to undergo environmental education training in South Africa. So having your entire worldview just completely switch can be really, it must have really been quite the experience, you know? So could you kindly walk us through what exactly allowed you to switch your worldview on different things regarding environmentalism because of your experience when you got to do the training in South Africa?
Okay, for me, leaving college, knowing that the government will not employ us, because that's when the World Bank had the structural adjustment program, there was an employment freeze in government. So I couldn't be employed as a forester in government. But then the words of Sister Kiran came back to say, what's worth doing is worth doing well. So I was like, where can I volunteer? I just need more experience. And that's how come I ended up at WWF. And again, a small thing is a small thing, but it's a great thing to be faithful to a small thing. I was an intern at WWF, but I committed to do the work that I was doing in the best way that I could. I applied my O-levels, I applied my diploma, I applied my experiential learning, and I was selected to go for the course in South Africa at Rhodes University. So true to my word and my promise to my father was that I would do economics at whatever point I do it. So within environmental education, I learned that all the wars in the world were based on natural resources for money. Now we call it the extractive industry, the mining, the timber harvesting. They are extracting from the earth every single day. And that feeds into business lines that form the economics of the world. So I understood then that even the people who make malasha for sale, it's within a certain economic niche that they want to produce, make money, go back and produce and make money, and that's economics. But within environmental education, again, with the experience of being in South Africa, which is very cosmopolitan, I learned that there's a political sphere to environment, to being an environmentalist. A lot of times I've been accused of being a politician because I speak about environmental health. Every disease that comes around is because there's a disturbance within the environment. And a lot of those decisions on how to control or mitigate or manage these crises come from a political point of view. So coming from Mwekera in Kitwe, all I knew was that environment is working in the bush, in the biosphere, within the trees and the soils and the water and the bees. But I didn't understand the influences around that natural resource, the politics around it, the economics around it, and the social aspect of it. People have lived in forests for many, many years, and they are intimate with the forests. They know where to set up a village. They know where to get water. I learned that if you don't have mosquito larva or a frog in water, don't drink it. It's not safe to drink. But if a living thing can live in that area of water, then it's good enough for you to drink as well. All those aspects just changed my worldview because I was coming from a place where to treat water, you have to put chemical, you put chlorine. But then I learned you could put charcoal in a bucket of water and the charcoal will purify the water for you to drink. So there's so many aspects. We had experiential learning in South Africa where we went to the poorest areas, and most of these are old mining areas. Everything is sterile. You won't find a blade of grass growing because the environment in that area has been totally disturbed because of financial or economic gain. and nobody's planting back or rehabilitating those areas because the cost of bringing back the environment the way it was before they started mining is too high. And the profits they have made have burnt on other things, not on the environment that they're supposed to have put back into place. My questioning began to arise to say, if there's a mine in an area, or timber has been harvested from an area, or a farm has been, or the forest cover has been cleared off and the farm has been set to replace it, the fertilizers would disturb the soil. All the insects and the worms that make the soil healthy would have been killed because of using insecticides and pesticides and herbicides. How then will that piece of area recover to be what it was? Where would we find the benefits of that ecological service, the oxygen we take for granted, the clean water that we take for granted? I can tell you now that last year, this rainy season that is ending now, the market did not have inswa as much as it had before. The market does not have fulufute. All these are edible insects from the forest because their habitat has been disturbed. How have they been disturbed? Because us humans have disturbed the environment and the circle of life in that particular place. So my worldview changed to say, as much as you're a forester, what are the political factors affecting the resources that you are preserving? What are the social aspects? What are the economic aspects? Is there a way that we can come up with sustainable development where we have development on one side, but it's green development and not extractive, where once that land is left, nobody will do anything with it? Maybe you can have solar farms because those are best in desert areas, but we'll be losing out and contributing towards the global warming and climate change. But if we allow nature to function the way it was created to function and still build around it, we would actually be giving back to nature. So the next time you buy a plot, don't cut down all the indigenous trees. Design your house around the nature that you have. You'll find you have less termites eating up your trusses in the roof. You'll find there are less insects, less mosquitoes and cockroaches, because all those come in, especially in areas that have been disturbed of their natural vegetation and natural soils. The next time you're building, think twice before you do paving, because then when it rains, where does the water go? It flows away. It doesn't sink into the soil. Then your boreholes start to grow dry. So all this information I'm sharing, the lessons I learned through experiential learning in South Africa, have changed my worldview greatly. And I hope it can change your worldview as well, so that together we work towards sustainable development while we respect nature.
Wow, I don't even know what exactly to say, because I think it's really challenging to think that we as humans would be the ones who disturb nature when we try to have all these activities and all these things going, instead of us trying to work around it and build around it so that we don't have the inconveniences that we face every now and then. So I think that's a really great thing that you had learned, and I'm so glad you got to share that with us. And I'm sure everyone present also, and everyone who's watching, would agree with me that that's a very valuable lesson that each of us need to know. Especially even in a world where we're dealing with the consequences of humans interacting with nature, like climate change and the like. I think definitely we need to learn how to work with it instead of against it. So moving forward, I'd also want to bring out how you co-founded the Namfumo Conservation Trust. And I would love to know what it's about and what the aha moment was, or what that particular thing that led you to co-found this organization, so that we can just learn more about everything else that you do?
Okay, thank you for asking that question. The aha moment really was the realization that I'll not get employed as a forester, because at the time when I was coming back from South Africa, the main trending jobs in the non-governmental organizations was around orphans and vulnerable children and HIV support and prevention. So I worked for CARE International, I worked for Plan International, and it had nothing to do with my forestry background, but it had everything to do with my ability to do strategic planning, to coordinate, to communicate with community members, to actually understand their needs. And with Plan International, I learned about the community-centered model of development. You need to ask the people what they want instead of you thinking for them and delivering a project that they will not appreciate. So after working on contracts, 2-year contracts, 3-year contracts, I realized that this wasn't what I wanted to do. I was doing all this for money, but it wasn't satisfying in the sense that we were missing one element, which was the environmental management aspect. You find a lot of poverty in the communities we work in around natural resources. It's around mental poverty. They have all the resources around them, but they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to monetize them. They don't know how to make an enterprise from them. But then they have all the indigenous knowledge needed for us to learn how to move forward. There's an African adage which goes, if you don't know where you are going, stop and look back. You learn lessons from the past that you can use in the future. So when you look at our old people, my attraction, as I said earlier on, is that when I'm in the villages, I look out for the old men, the old women, and I sit with them and we start to joke. And within the jokes, I would ask serious questions, critical questions like, okay, how come you don't have cholera here in the village, but we have cholera in town? They would laugh and say, of course you have cholera in town. Everybody lives in front of each other or behind each other. And I'd be like, what do you mean by that? Then they would say, look around. This village is surrounded by trees. Our neighbors are far away. So if our neighbors far away have a disease, it won't come to us unless we do certain things that bring that disease to us. That for me was very critical to say, why don't we have indigenous knowledge in school? We need to learn how our forefathers lived a healthy life. They ate healthy foods. They didn't have chicken and chips or polony and burgers, but they had the chikanda, they had the pupwe, they had all the traditional foods around them, because those were functional foods. They gave them all the nutrients, they gave them all the vitamins and mineral salts that they needed, because the food was living food. In the cities, we often eat dead food. Sorry to say, but it is dead food. In the sense that it's full of pesticides, it's full of fertilizers, it's full of genetically modified enzymes, and everything in it is created for the commercial market, but it's not healthy for us. So talking to the old people, the aha moment was that they know what we don't know. An old woman sitting down sees more than a young bride standing up, in the sense that she's there looking at everything happening, whereas the young bride is walking around doing this and that and tinkering and frolicking with this and that. So at the end of the day, the aha moment was, let us learn from the village people, from the indigenous people, from these people who have the wisdom of age. They have seen life through a certain lens that we need to tap into. And that's what brought in the enviropreneurship. Enviro from the environment, then preneur from entrepreneurship. Money can be made by learning from the past, by sitting with the old women and men as our libraries. Remember, they're not here for a long time. They're not immortal, but the information they carry is immortal. We just have to recognize them as a library of knowledge and adapt that to our current living. I asked, how come you have children every 2 years and you don't use contraceptives? They're like, because we use herbs and we use beads. We put beads around our waist and there's a protocol around that. If you're a big woman, they count 20 beads and they put a herb. That herb is tried and tested in the community, not in the lab. They don't have labs, they don't have standards, they don't have phytosanitary certificates and all these other academic things, but they have a tried and tested birth regime which enables them to have babies every 2 years. So the science behind the beads is what has been used to create the contraceptive patch. The skin on our bodies is the largest organ and it's the most communicative organ. If you put onion on your wrist, you'll be able to taste it in your mouth because the onion is taken into the bloodstream and it circulates into your body and you taste it in your mouth. That's the concept they have used. On every 10th or 20th bead, they put a herb that alters or regulates the progesterone and estrogen in a woman's body naturally. It has no side effects because if the chemical in the herb is too much, the woman pees it out. Whereas when you take contraceptives from the clinic, I have respect for hospitals, I have respect for medicine, you get side effects. So the husband would put it around the wife's waist and they would agree to take it off after 24 months. By that time, the baby they currently have is old enough to have a sibling. That's the indigenous knowledge they've used, and the science behind it is that the labs in the West then got the same chemical and reverse chemistry the chemicals in the herb into a patch. You buy the patch, you put it on your body around your waist, it falls off when the chemical is fully absorbed into the body. Where's that information from? It's from the village. That's the aha moment. How come they knew that that works the way it does? It's because they live intimately with nature. They know which herbs. But right now, I can tell you that every bag of charcoal, every piece of timber we see being sold is carrying away our essence, our pharmacy, the pharmacy our forefathers and grandmothers have lived with in the forest for all these years. So what Namfumu does is that we talk about the old because our rural people will relate to it. We're not teaching them anything new. We just introduce the topic and then they pick it up and they start to teach us. Then we start to translate that into science. And we're able to say, fine, how come you use this blade of grass for diarrhea? They'll be like, look at the dogs. When they have diarrhea, they chew on the grass and the diarrhea goes away. So we take that grass and take it to UNZA to say what chemical is in this grass that stops diarrhea. And they're like, oh, there's this and that, and there's zinc. Like, oh, okay, how did the people in the village know? It works for them. But most of us modern people think that information from the rural areas and the villages is pagan and it's old-fashioned. But when COVID came, guess what happened? All of us rushed back to the village to get herbs so that we steam ourselves and renew our respiratory systems. That's information they've had for years. We just have to tap into that and promote it. And soon we will know why the Chinese have kept their science on their traditional knowledge. They use green tea, they use ginseng. All that is information from their forests passed on from one generation to another. So right now as Namfumu, we are selling herbs. We are members of Tapaz, and we have herbs that the women themselves formulate, and the herbs work. So it's an area for exploration. It's an area for partnership. Would like to invite other people who have ideas so that together we package these Zambian traditional solutions for health, for wealth, and for other things. Cosmetics from the mpundu tree. They used to use the mpundu tree as a food. The pulp is a food. The nut is a form of fuel, and the nut inside has oil that you could use for cooking or for your skin as a cosmetic. It's very rich in vitamin E. So this knowledge is what we're taking out to the young people, to all the people around, all those interested, so that together we come up with eco solutions within an enviropreneurship space. Hello? Are you still there?
It's really fascinating. And I think everyone would agree that the aha moment is certainly something worth it, because I mean, as you said, sometimes we think the village, the ideas from people from the village can be archaic, they can be, as you said, pagan, or maybe just like not or impractical rather. So I think to actually know that there are solutions which are just being resold to us, but are actually originating from even ideas which are so I would say normal amongst people who may not necessarily live in the urban areas is really interesting as well. Um, we have a question here in the chat, which says, really learning a lot, especially about the political issues around natural resources management. But this is simple but vital information for the general populace to be aware of. How can we bring this to be part of the core curriculum of the school system? Perhaps, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I would. It's information that we are exposed to every day, but it hasn't been packaged in such a way that it can be introduced from elementary school all the way into secondary school. For tertiary education in the colleges, you can learn about how the political aspect interfaces with environmental management at Mwekera, for example. Then also UNZA right now is offering an environmental education course, and it stands on the 4 pillars of environment, economy, politics, and social aspects. But I know that through the National Adaptation Program, they're doing a communication policy that will influence the curriculum development people to ensure that from nursery school, we see how decisions contribute to how we look at the environment. The council, the WDCs, the councillors, the MPs should have that on their agenda to always realize that when you're planning for a residential area, you need to look at the environment around it, the ecology. You find now we have houses that are flooding because they were built on an underground stream, or they are built in a Dambo area where it will flood every year anyway. So why put a house there when it's not meant for housing occupation? So we are with you on this, but again, remember that the school system is managed by people that may not be exposed to environmental education. Then the environmental educators may not be exposed to the aspects of policy creation in the Ministry of Education. So it's an aspect that's a work in progress. And hopefully once the communication strategy is done, we'll see how the Ministry of Education picks it up and infuses it as a practical aspect of the school curriculum. Every school for me should have a little forest around it, whether it's planted or it's natural, because that becomes your open lab. You can learn about photosynthesis, about geotropism, about phototropism from your living library and laboratory outside your own classroom. You don't just have to look at it in the textbooks, because then you won't be able to relate to it. I hope I've answered, seeing that we only have 9 minutes left.
I think you definitely have. I would like to believe that the question has been answered. We have another question here which says, with the law Zambezi issue, do you believe we could do more, even when it seems like all the facts are against us and the mining will still begin? Do you believe there's something more that we can do to stop it?
This is a sensitive question in the fact that this is already in court. It's in the High Court right now. So I'll just respond to it generally. Yes, I know there are things that we can do to save the ecology and ecosystem of the Lower Zambezi. And yes, I know that because of the political influences and some of the social and economic aspects, the environmental aspect is being watered down and not being seen as important. But the important critical aspect we need to think about is that the Lower Zambezi is part of a larger ecosystem which is shared with Mozambique and Zimbabwe. When you look at the Zambezi River Basin in itself, it starts from all the way in Mwinilunga, it goes into Angola, passes through Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and ends up at Caborabassa and the Indian Ocean out of Mozambique. So whatever we do on whichever side of the country adjacent to the Zambezi River will affect the whole length of it downstream. So we really need to think strategically and outside our immediate need to say what other economic activities can the people living in proximity of the Lower Zambezi National Park and GMA do to survive. Mining is part of the extractive industry. It doesn't always offer solutions because there's capital flight. The money made from mining often doesn't end up in the area where the mine is. It is exported to other areas. I won't say too much because it's an issue in court. I might be cited for contempt.
No, I think that your response was still adequate enough. I think, yeah, if the, and yes, the person who's asked the question, Steven Smart Mukemo, has said that you've answered very well, and thank you for it. I think my last two questions, I think I would like to combine them. My last two questions are your general thoughts around ecofeminism and how exactly someone who is inspired by your story and maybe has really been challenged by everything that you've talked about, how they can also pursue a career similar to yours, so that they can also express this worldview or this particular approach of valuing indigenous knowledge and valuing the ideas around not being extractive towards nature, but also just seeing how we can work with it and against it. So generally, your thoughts on ecofeminism and how one can pursue a career similar to yours and what advice you'd give them.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll start with the one on ecofeminism. I believe that life is about balance. It's about the yin and the yang. So the feminist energy, the feminine energy and the masculine energy have to work together for life and nature to continue. I'll talk about pollination, for example. The bee has to be the agent of pollination so that the pollen can pollinate the other pollen for reproduction of the plant to go on. In men and women, the same thing happens. A woman can't have a child by herself. A man cannot have a child by himself. But when you look at the bigger picture, ecofeminism for me is the very essence of the earth enshrined in feminine energy. The earth is called Mother Earth, Mother Nature. Most of the cyclones and storms we've had are feminine. So when you fully understand the feminine energy, you will see that it carries its own type of force, but it's always complemented with the male energy, the masculine energy. When you look at the use of the forest, you find that the feminine energy would always want to reproduce. They would gather only certain fruits and leave other fruits for seed. They would pick up some of the best masuku, some of the best mushrooms, some of the best caterpillars, but they would always leave something so that the caterpillars can come again next year, so that there are baby trees coming up this year and will continue the life of the forest in perpetuity. But sometimes you'd find that the masculine energy is the one that wants to cut down the whole forest because there will be money for immediate use. The people who do charcoal are men. They don't care if the tree is medicinal, if it's a fruit tree. They just want to fill up that bag of charcoal and make their money. So in essence, Mother Nature is the giver of life. The feminine energy yields life. Life form emerges out of the feminine. And for me, through experiential learning and sitting with the old men and women, I would ask the old men, what is the medicine for this? They'll be like, ask the women. I'll be like, fine, what is the hunting ethic of this? They'll be like, it is in this way and that way and that way. But of course, the male energy, the masculine energy is known for hunting, for provision, but not so much for reproduction. Suffice to say that the fertile seed of male is what fertilizes the female fertile egg in the female. But in essence, we need a balance between the feminism and the masculinism. They complement each other. One being overpowering over the other will, of course, cause an imbalance. When we talk about nature, we talk about the balance of life, the circle of life. There's never a point where one is stronger than the other. Talking about it in governance, the female voice has to be heard because a lot of knowledge and wisdom dies with the feminine because they're always not given a chance to speak. In Kenya, for example, Watangui, I think she protected the whole forest in Nairobi. She stood alone as a woman. She stood with other women. She stood with other people. But she was the martyr to make sure that that forest is conserved and is maintained in the center of Nairobi. I'm not saying that men don't do that, but it was the feminine energy that she used to protect what she knew she had to protect. In terms of advice to the young people, we all have different talents. I was lucky that I identified my passion, my talent at a very early age. But what's important is to follow your passion, whether it's in the environment or it's in engineering or it's in cooking. Brings back the words of Sister Kiran. What's worth doing is worth doing well. So if it's worth me doing forestry work, what else can I give to it by thinking outside the box? What innovations can I come up with? What initiatives can I be involved in? So that no matter what way it goes, provided your fuel is coming from your personal energy, you believe in what you're doing, you are inquisitive and curious to learn more about the area that you're working in, you will do great things. But if you're doing it to please mommy and daddy or to please society, right now it's very nice and comfortable to be an environmentalist. A few years ago, it was very nice to be an HIV activist. What do you want to do? Who are you? Are you self-aware that you're able to identify with a lot of influence from other people to be all that you can be? Are you surrounding yourself with the values, with the people who can guide you? Nobody lives a solitary life. We are Ubuntu. Ubuntu is that I am because you are, because we are. I cannot be where I am if I did not have Miss Brown, I had Vanessa Williams, I had Juliana Chileshe, David Macharia. I had so many people around me that I listened to what was building and adding value to me. I applied that and now I am. So I am because you are, because we are. That would be my advice. So it doesn't matter if you're a nurse or you're a doctor or you're a farmer or you love bees and you're a beekeeper or you like to make jam. Just give it all you have and learn to make money from it.
Wow,
Don't
thank
have
you
money
so
to
much.
make your dreams. Have a dream that will get you money. I'm still here.
Oh, yes. Did you finish your thought? I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No, you didn't. All I was saying was be the best that you can be, and the money will follow. But if you make the money, then you won't sustain it because you're not using your own passion to sustain it.
Thank you so much for that. And once again, it's been a really insightful webinar. It's been a really insightful discussion with you. And it's been absolutely amazing to really just dive deeper into your story and learn more about everything that you've accomplished and and the values behind those accomplishments. So I think before letting you go, I'd just love to ask if you have any final words that you'd love to share with each and every one of us so that we may close it off on a good note and just hear from you.
My last words will be short. I just want to thank everybody that has influenced me throughout my life, the people that are yet to influence me. And my mantra still remains. If it's worth doing, do it well. If it's not worth doing, don't do it.
Indeed. And we have a comment that says, thank you for sharing your story and insightful ideas. I am also one of those people who would like to say that. Thank you so much for this. Really appreciate your time. And would also, before we go, I'd also just love to mention that you can follow the Women's History Museum on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, as well as Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch Musonda Kapena's story on Leading Ladies Season 4, Episode 2. And you can also watch all our various other episodes of Leading Ladies so that you can be up to date with all the amazing things that Zambian women as well as women from across Africa have done that have proven and shown their capacity to lead in different fields in the world. So from me, Musenga Katongo, who's been your host, I'd love to just say thank you so much and have a good evening.